Hello and welcome students in yet another video lecture. I am Chandra Prakash Tiwari, PGT English, Kendriya Vidyalaya Ara. And today we'll deal with a very unusual chapter that is neither a story, nor a poem, nor a drama, not even an essay. Then what it is? Can you guess about it? Okay, let me tell you. It is an interview. And this chapter is divided into two parts. The first part chronicles the evolution of interview as a genre in journalism and people's opinion about it, especially of some famous literature, some major critics, and some famous personalities. And some of them are even Nobel laureate. So the second part is an interview itself with a famous writer Umberto Eco. So this chapter is divided into two parts. The first part talks about the interview itself, and the second part gives an example in the form of interview of Umberto Eco. Fine. So before going directly to the chapter, we need to know a little about the writer itself, Christopher Sylvester. So Christopher Sylvester has been a freelance journalist and author since the early 1980s. And he cut his teeth on the fortnightly satirical magazine Private Eye, where he wrote The New Boys. Cut his teeth means he has started his career with satirical magazine Private Eye, where he wrote the New Boys profiles of newly elected MPs during the Thatcher's years. So he used to write about the profiles, means a short biography, the short introduction of the newly elected MPs, member of parliaments in Margaret Thatcher's regime. He also contributed to the Eye's Street of Shame and Grovel columns, as well as writing investigative reports on business. So here you can easily understand that he has been associated with journalism and he has been writing about people's profile, biography, etc. So interview is also very much close to that. Now we can start. So we'll begin with the part 1. Interview, an inevitable part of journalism, was discovered over 130 years ago. These days, it is nothing out of the ordinary. In fact, people who are educated are believed to have read an interview at one or other point in their lives. And on the other hand, almost every celebrity has been interviewed more than once. Students, when I use this word interview, or when you read this word interview, I do not need to define it for you. You are already familiar with this. You are already familiar and very much acquainted with the term interview, and you know what happens in interview. It is a two-man and sometimes more than two-man process. When there is an interviewer and there is an interview, means a person asks a question and another person answers the question. And every day you do watch interviews on television channels, on YouTube channels, be it sports, music, news, politics, etc. So interview is related with each and every walk of life, and all the famous celebrities and personalities of every walk of life are interviewed, and people want to watch those interviews in order to know about them. And people are interested in their personal lives, in their public life, and that's why interviews comes very handy to know all about this. In fact, interview has become a very common place of journalism. It has become an integral part of our lives. And you must have watched some of the episodes of Rendezvous with Simi Garewal, Seedhi Baat with Prabhu Chawla, or Face to Face with Karan Thapar. Or if I talk about some interviews which are lighter in its vein and tone, so you might have seen Jeena Isi Ka Naam Hai by Farooq Sheikh, or in a very lighter vein, even more lighter, Coffee with Karan. So all these are but interviews of various kinds, means of varying degree in their seriousness and in their subjects. And you might have heard the name of Oprah Winfrey. She is an international personality and she is famous for her interviews. So, in this regard, I suggest you to watch some of the interviews taken by these eminent interviewers, and then you will realize that even taking interviews is also an art, and it also demands skills and studies. If you watch some episodes of Karan Thapar or Prabhu Chawla, you will come to know about this, that how adept they are in their skill of interviewing people. Fine. Many people have conflicting views about the uses and advantages of an interview. Some people have elaborative claims about its goodness, as they believe it to be a path towards knowing complete truth and considered its practice to be an art. If I looked at from the interviewee's point of view, it may look like an unwanted intervention in their personal lives. But here the author talks about the different opinions and diverse opinions of people regarding interview. Some people find interview that it is very good and it helps us to know the complete truth. Suppose that we are living in 2021 and we want to know about some truth about Mahatma Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore, and there are a lot of controversies regarding Mahatma Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore, or anyone. So, what do we do? First of all, we try to take help of their books, or we read their interviews. This is the only way. This is the last resort we take help of. That how do we assess the truth behind all those controversy? How can we verify those truth and those false accusations against them? So it is the only way that we read their interviews taken by some famous interviewers of their time. So interview come very handy in this manner, and even in these days, because what happens that when we read some news, when we come to know about some news, some controversy or any other information, so most of the time it is third person narrative, third person's view. But what is the speciality of interview? That it is always first hand view, and the interviewer always confronts the man or the woman directly. That's why there is no question of ambiguity. So what comes to us is from the first hand perspective. But if looked at from the interviewee's point of view, it may look like an unwanted intervention in their personal life. But on the other hand, for some people, interview is a very bad kind of thing, because it is a kind of attack on the personal lives of the people. You know that all these famous personalities like sports persons and famous personalities of movies, literature, art, they are interviewed, and this interview is a kind of attack on their personal lives, because their personal life is different thing, their public life is absolutely different thing. And it doesn't mean that because they are famous personalities so they are not allowed to live their personal life. But when they face an interview, the interviewer many a time asks personal questions which they do not want to reveal. And everyone has right to live their personal life, and everyone wants to keep certain things to themselves. They do not want to reveal it to the world. That is a kind of agony if that is known to the world. So this way, this interview is like an unwanted intervention in the personal lives. Then it creates a picture in the minds of readers and viewers which, according to an old saying, steals the original identity of the person. Many famous personalities have a bad impression in their minds about interviews. The cosmopolitan writer V.S. Naipaul feels that a bad interview has a tendency of leaving them wounded for life. And in a very famous phrase, this writer says that it creates pictures in the mind of readers and viewers, which, according to an old saying, steals the original identity of the person. Means the kind of questions an interviewer asks, and they always ask certain probing questions, and they try to elicit all sorts of informations from the person, and that's why it is a kind of stealing the original identity of the person. A person may be an actor, may be a sports person, may be a politician, maybe an artist, maybe maybe a literator, but at the same time he has his own original identity, and that is not supposed to be shared with others. But in interviews, most of the time, they try to steal that. And that's why very famous personalities are not at ease with uh, interviews. And one among them is V.S. Naipaul. And you may have heard his name, Vidyadhar Suraj Prasad Naipaul. Uh, he is uh, Caribbean novelist. He was a Caribbean novelist from Indian origin, and later he shifted to London, and he won Nobel Prize in 2001. And not only Nobel Prize, but he also won Pulitzer Prize for his book In a Free State in 1971, and he won Nobel Prize in 2001, and his most famous book is A House of Mr. Biswas. So V.S. Naipaul, who is such a great novelist, feels that a bad interview has a tendency of leaving them wounded for life. Means if you go through a bad interview, so the impression of that bad interview is indelible, that cannot be deleted from your life, and it leaves you wounded for your entire life. Such is the bad effect of interview. Then he talks about another person, and the person is creator of Alice in Wonderland. And I hope that this you must know. You must have seen the movie The Alice in Wonderland, and you might have read the book also, Alice in Wonderland. It is a book by Lewis Carroll. So once he was interviewed, and he was too scared of the interviewer. He feared that a lot of attention would be drawn towards him, and thus he remained away from those who knew him, those who wanted to either interview him or get an autograph of his. He would narrate tales of his success at avoiding such requests with satisfaction and enjoyment. So he was not at all satisfied with interview or autograph. Means he always considered himself as an artist, but he always kept himself aloof from his personality. That as a person he was someone else, as an artist he was something else, and these two should not be mixed up. Then it is an extremely unpleasant experience, and no man with self-respect would ask or consent to it. Ironically, Kipling once carried on such assault on Mark Twain some years earlier. The famous English novelist and journalist H.G. Wells said that an interview was an unpleasant experience, but 40 years later, he interviewed the Russian revolutionary Joseph Stalin. And then he talks about the two famous novelists, Rudyard Kipling, a very famous man, and you must have seen many movies or serials, or you might have even read the book, The Jungle Book. The Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling. His another famous book is Kimball O'Hara. So Rudyard Kipling was also strongly against the idea of getting interviewed. His wife recorded one such incident in her diary, when their day in Boston was ruined by two reporters. She also made an account of why her husband refused to appear for an interview. According to him, interviews are the immortal, and he calls interviewing a crime which should attract punishment just as any other crime. So uh, Rudyard Kipling's wife records an incident, and she says that Rudyard Kipling doesn't like interview at all, and he considers this art of interview as a crime. That interviewer is a kind of culprit, because you find yourself uncomfortable, and the person is absolutely free to ask any kind of questions, and in answer you cannot ask any question. You have to sit idle and you have to answer them without any question. That's why they find this interview a very horrific experience, and they don't want to be interviewed at all. According to him, interviews are immortal, and this is very important, that once you are interviewed and once you express yourself, whatsoever it is, maybe it is your very secret idea, very secret information, a very personal thing. So once it is recorded, it is public, and it is public forever, and then you cannot retrieve it back. Uh, you cannot withdraw it. That's why it is immortal, and that's why it is very deadly dangerous. So once it is out for always, and then it can harm you. And that's why Vaishnav Paul says that it injures you for the entire life. And so is the H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells, uh, H.G. Wells also against the idea of interview, but later on he himself did an interview of Joseph Stalin. So you should read about these people like Rudyard Kipling, Joseph Stalin, H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells is a science fiction writer, and his famous works are The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, and he is one of the pioneers in science fiction writing. And you must read his book. You will find it very interesting. And Stalin is a charismatic Russian communist leader. Later, he turned into a dictator. So these all famous are eminent and illustrious personalities of the world. And what they think about the interview, their ideas are expressed in this chapter. So H.G. Wells said that an interview was an unpleasant experience, but 40 years later, he interviewed the Russian revolutionary Joseph Stalin. So, this also talks about the changing attitude of people, that how H.G. Wells was against the idea of interview initially, and he was very reluctant to take or give any kind of interview. But later on, he himself took the interview of Joseph Stalin. So you can look at the change of attitude of H.G. Wells, and nowadays no one questions like that. Still, there are people who do not want to be interviewed, but no one. It's very rare, because now people are very much exposed to the world, and they themselves want to display their own lives, like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. All these social media platforms are what? They are media to showcase and display your personal life. That's why the world has become very much open, and now people are less reluctant to be interviewed. Then he talks about another writer whose name is Saul Bellow. Saul Bellow commented that an interview seemed to be like fingertips on the windpipe, which means that he felt choked and suffocated when he sat for one. So you need to know a little about Saul Bellow. Saul Bellow is a Pulitzer and Nobel laureate, and he won Nobel Prize in 1976. And his books are so famous, like The Adventure of Augie March, Herjog, and many more. So once he said that an interview seemed to fulfill its purpose of communicating with the audience. According to Dennis Bryan, an interview gives us the most clear impression of the people of our times. The setup of one man, the interviewer asking questions from the other, the interviews gives him power and influence. So he says that interview is such a suffocating thing that it seems that someone is choking my neck, someone is choking my windpipe, and I'm unable to breathe in. But despite the drawback, means despite the weakness, despite the loopholes, an interview seemed to fulfill its purpose of communicating with the audience. But you know what is beauty of interview? That people have various questions about their celebrities, about their heroes, about their role models, but they cannot ask those questions directly to them. Those famous personalities are beyond their reach, but with the help of the interviewer they are able to get those answers. So this is the beauty and this is the purpose of interview, that it communicates with the audience. According to Dennis Bryan, an interview gives us the most clear impression of the people of our times. As I gave you example of Tagore and Gandhi, so interview gives us the best impression of our time and of the people, because there are certain peoples in all walks of the life, they symbolizes their time, they are the representative of their time in the terms of politics, sports, movies, art, literature, folk. So interviews are always or most of the time taken of the famous personalities. So these interviews represent or reflect the basic tenets of the time. The setup of one man, the interviewer asking questions from the other. The interview gives him the power and influence. So it is beneficial for both the interviewer and the interviewee. So here we come to an end of the part 1. So in another video lecture, we'll deal with the part 2. Thank you for watching this.